My name is Rowan Hale, and I'm 32 years old. The farm I grew up on in Fresno County, California, the land my mother literally bled for, the soil she tended until her last breath, now has my father's new wife's initials stamped on the ownership papers. I found out from our neighbor Tom, not from my own father. Tom stopped me at the feed store, looking uncomfortable. Rowan, I saw the county records. Your dad transferred the deed. I'm sorry. My stomach dropped. I drove home in complete silence, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. That night, I barely slept. By dawn, I was standing near the old barn where my father was checking equipment. The morning air was cold, but my blood was colder. You gave away the farm, I said. Not a question. A statement. He didn't look at me, didn't even turn around, just kept his eyes on some rusted tool in his hands. Seraphine understands business better than you do, Rowan. She has plans. Real plans. The wind suddenly felt sharper against my face. Colder. Like even the weather knew something terrible had just been spoken out loud. This was the land my mother built from nothing. And he'd given it to a woman he'd known for 8 months. Seraphine arrived an hour later, stepping out of her expensive car in designer boots that had never seen a day of actual work. She was smiling that bright, fake smile she always wore. In her perfectly manicured hands, she held a thick folder. "Morning, Rowan," she called out cheerfully. I brought the contractor's list. So many exciting renovations planned. Renovations. Not crop rotations. Not irrigation improvements. Not soil health assessments. Renovations. She wasn't here to farm. She wasn't here to continue what my mother had built. She was here to flip land for profit, to turn my family's legacy into a real estate transaction. I looked at my father. He was staring at the ground, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. "You're okay with this?" I asked him quietly. He just shrugged. "It's done, Rowan. Time to move forward." Move forward. Like my mother's entire life could just be erased and replaced. I thought about my mother right then. Mama teaching me soil testing before breakfast when I was 7. Showing me how to fix wilted crops with carefully measured ash and compost. Singing softly to seedlings like they could actually hear her voice and grow stronger because of it. She believed in this land the way some people believe in religion. My mother came from farming generations. Thousands of acres of family land, agricultural wisdom passed down like sacred text. She knew soil the way doctors know anatomy. She could look at a plant and diagnose its needs instantly. My father grew up in San Francisco, surrounded by concrete and streetlights. He'd met my mother at UC Davis, where she was studying agricultural science, and he was getting a business degree. He'd loved who she was, her intelligence, her passion, her strength. But he'd always hated where she came from. I remember one terrible night when I was 12 years old. They were fighting in the kitchen. Dad was shouting, his face red with frustration. "You dragged me here. This land destroyed my life. I could have had a career, a real life in the city." My mother just cried silently, tears running down her face without sound. The farm seemed to listen to that fight, the night air heavy with unspoken pain. From that night on, something broke between them. He stayed physically, but left emotionally. He paid the bills because he had to, but he never cared about the land again. He just resented it. Resented her. Resented the choice he'd made to follow her here. After Mom died 3 years ago, I kept everything running. The land and I had survived together, partners in grief and growth. Seraphine wasted no time asserting control. Within the first week, she announced new house rules. Muddy boots were banned indoors, which sounds reasonable until you realize farming means mud. It means dirt. It means the outside world coming inside, because they're connected. She fired our seasonal farmhands, people who'd worked this land for years, who knew every field and crop cycle. She did it without consulting anyone, just sent them away with a week's severance and false smiles. Then she started selling livestock without any strategy, without understanding breeding cycles or market timing. The farm started dying. I watched it happen in real time. Irrigation schedules were wrong because she didn't understand water needs. Crops were planted in incorrect rotations. Equipment was used improperly because she refused to listen to people who actually knew farming. I tried talking to Dad. Found him near the equipment shed one afternoon. "The irrigation timing is completely wrong," I said, trying to stay calm. "We're losing crops. The soil moisture levels are." He cut me off, his voice sharp and cold. "You sound exactly like your mother." He said it like an accusation, like sounding like my mother was somehow a flaw, a problem to be fixed. It wasn't a compliment. It was dismissal. It was erasure. 2 months in, Seraphine called a family meeting. I sat at the kitchen table where my mother used to make bread, where we planned harvests and celebrated good growing seasons. Seraphine stood like she was giving a business presentation. "I've decided to lease several acres to billboard companies," she announced brightly. "The income will be substantial. Much more profitable than farming." She said farming like it was a dirty word. Like 60 years of feeding people was worthless compared to advertising revenue. That soil had grown food for 3 generations, had fed families, had been tended with love and science and backbreaking work. And she wanted to cover it with signs for fast food and car insurance. I stood up slowly. Didn't say a word. Just looked at my father one last time, hoping he'd say something, anything. He stared at his coffee cup like it held answers. I walked out of that kitchen, knowing I'd never sit at that table as family again. That night, I made my decision.
No yelling. No begging.
No emotional scenes that they could dismiss as drama. I packed my mother's journals. Years of detailed observations, soil maps, seed rotations, weather patterns. I packed the documents she'd kept in her desk. And I walked off the land silently. My silence scared them more than any shouting could have. I saw it in their faces as I loaded my truck. Fear of what quiet determination might mean. I rented a small apartment in town and started reading through my mother's journals properly for the first time. I'd looked at them before, but never studied them. Not like this. Not with purpose. Inside, I found hand-drawn water tables showing underground flow patterns, mineral composition maps of different sections, detailed records of soil pH levels across the property. And then I found something bigger. Something my mother had kept hidden even from me, maybe waiting until I was ready to understand. Original property deeds. Historical documents showing land divisions from the 1960s. Boundary surveys. And, most importantly, water rights registrations. The land had 2 completely different water rights zones, established separately decades apart. Both were registered under my mother's maiden name, Morrison. A detail my father had never bothered to learn, had never cared about. My mother's family had owned this land long before she'd married my father. She'd added him to some portions when they'd married, but she'd never transferred certain rights. The water access, specifically. That remained under Morrison family entitlement, which meant it remained with me. I was the only Morrison left. I sat in my apartment reading these documents until 3 in the morning, my heart pounding. My mother had protected something. She'd left me a weapon I hadn't known existed. At 5 o'clock the next morning, I hiked out to the back border of the property. The section nobody ever visited because it was dry land, considered useless for farming. The sun wasn't up yet, just gray pre-dawn light. I knew from Mom's maps that the original survey stakes should still be here somewhere. I searched through dry grass and scrub brush, getting scratched by wild plants, my boots covered in dust. And then I found it, a metal stake, old and weathered but still solid, stamped with official markings. Fresno County Survey 1962. This was the original boundary marker proving the split land entitlement. 2 separate parcels, divided by water access rights, both registered under Morrison. The eastern section, the section my father and Seraphine thought they fully owned, was actually contingent on water rights they didn't control. Water rights I'd inherited through my mother's family line. Without those rights, their section was nearly worthless for agriculture. I took photographs. Documented everything. GPS coordinates. Close-ups of the stake and its markings. Then I hiked back to my truck as the sun rose, already planning my next move. I drove straight to the Fresno County Land and Water Rights Office when it opened at 8. The clerk at the county office was a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 20 years. She looked at my documents with increasing interest. "These are original Morrison family registrations," she said. "Water rights from the aquifer access established in 1965. Can I file a petition to restore the original land division?" I asked. "Based on these water rights and the historical boundaries?" Patricia studied the papers carefully. "You're asking to reestablish the legal property lines based on resource access rather than the current deed structure?" I nodded. She looked at me seriously. "This will be contested. Your father will fight it." "Let him," I said.
My voice was steady. Calm.
My mother had taught me that quiet confidence was stronger than loud anger. Patricia nodded slowly. "I'll file it for review. The water board will need to assess it. Could take a few weeks." "That's fine," I said. "I'll wait." I left the office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation. Not for family healing. But for justice. For my mother's legacy being protected the way she'd intended. Over the next 3 weeks, I waited. I worked temporary jobs. I studied every document my mother had left. I prepared for what was coming. And I stayed silent. Didn't warn them. Didn't give them time to prepare a defense. While I waited for the county's decision, strange things started happening at the farm. I heard about it through Tom and other neighbors. Seraphine had been posting constantly on social media about farm life, pictures of herself in designer clothes against rural backdrops, motivational quotes about country living. But professional crop specialists were declining her calls. Equipment suppliers were suddenly too busy to take her orders. The farming community in Fresno County is tight-knit. Word spreads fast. And they'd heard about what she'd done, firing good workers, disrespecting the land, treating farming like a real estate flip. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone was quietly refusing to help her. It was the community's way of protecting one of their own.
Me.
And punishing someone who disrespected everything they valued. Then my father started noticing problems he couldn't ignore. Tom told me he'd seen Dad walking the fields looking confused and worried. The soil was chalking, turning pale and lifeless because the irrigation was wrong and the nutrients were depleted. Crops were stunted, some dying entirely. The land was crying out for help, but neither Dad nor Seraphine knew how to hear it. One morning, Tom said he'd seen my father just standing in the middle of a dying field, looking lost, looking afraid. Like he was finally understanding what he destroyed. The approval came faster than I'd expected. 6 weeks after filing, Patricia called me. "Rowan, the water board approved your petition. The land division is being restored based on original agricultural water access rights. You'll need to physically mark the new boundary line." My hands shook as I held the phone. "How soon?" "Surveying team can start next week. You'll need to hire a fencing crew to mark it properly once the survey is complete."
"I'll handle it," I said.
I thanked her and hung up. I didn't announce anything to my father or Seraphine. Didn't warn them. Didn't send a courtesy email or make a phone call.
This was legal now.
Official. They'd get their notification from the county, not from me. Instead, I hired a local surveying crew, people who'd known my mother who understood what this meant. I paid them in full upfront. Then I hired a fencing company. "I need posts and wire. Property boundary marking. Can you start at sunrise on Thursday?" The contractor nodded. "We'll be there at 6 a.m. Thursday morning, I drove out to the property. Parked on the public road, where I had every legal right to be. I watched as the crew arrived with posts and equipment, with the official survey maps and county authorization documents. The sun was just coming up, painting everything gold and pink. It was the kind of morning my mother used to love. Good farming light, she'd called it. I don't know what time my father and Seraphine woke up that morning, but I know exactly when they stepped outside. I was sitting in my truck, drinking coffee, when I saw the front door open. Seraphine came out first, probably heading to her car for another day of whatever she did that wasn't farming. She froze on the porch. Just stopped mid-step like she'd hit an invisible wall. Then my father appeared behind her. He looked toward the fields, and his face went completely blank. Not angry, not confused, just blank, like his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. The fencing crew was working methodically, posts being hammered into earth with steady, rhythmic strikes, each one hitting like a judgment, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had been unspoken for too long. The fence was splitting the property in two, but not down the middle, not in any way they would have expected. The new boundary line followed the original Morrison family water rights designation. It divided the land by soil fertility and aquifer access. The rich land, the eastern 40 acres with the best soil, the reliable water access, the productive fields, that was mine now. Legally. Officially. Mine through my mother's family inheritance and water rights. The dry land, the western section with poor soil quality, limited water access, the fields that required the most work and produced the least, that was theirs. My father walked toward the fence line like a man in a dream. Slow steps. Hesitant. Like maybe if he moved carefully enough, this wouldn't be real. Seraphine was yelling something, but I couldn't hear what. Her voice was high and sharp, but the distance swallowed the words. The crew foreman, a man named Miguel who'd worked for my mother years ago, approached my father with documents. Official county papers. Survey maps. Legal authorizations. Everything properly filed and approved. I saw my father take the papers. Saw him read them. His shoulders sagged like someone had cut supporting wires. He looked up from the documents, and his eyes found my truck. Found me sitting there, watching silently. Rowan. Even from this distance, I could see his mouth form my name. Maybe the first time he'd used it like it mattered in months. Like I was a real person and not just an obstacle to his new life. I didn't get out of my truck. Didn't walk over. Didn't gloat or explain or justify. Just sat there, coffee in hand, watching the fence go up post by post. Watching the boundary become permanent and real and legal. This was my mother's legacy protecting itself. This was justice delivered quietly, with county seals and survey stakes and water rights law.
No yelling.
No drama. Just consequences. Seraphine completely lost control. I watched her scream at the survey crew, waving her arms, her face red. She was threatening lawsuits, calling them trespassers, demanding they stop immediately. But Miguel just pointed at the county seal on the documents. That official stamp shut down every argument. She couldn't threaten her way out of this. Couldn't charm or manipulate or buy her way around it. This was done. Legal. Final. The fence continued going up, post after post, wires stretching between them like stitches closing a wound. I finally got out of my truck. Not to gloat. Not to argue. Just to walk the line. To see it myself. The fence divided the property exactly along the aquifer access boundary. Every single post was placed according to the 1962 survey map my mother had preserved. The eastern section, my section, had the natural spring access. Had the best topsoil. Had the irrigation infrastructure my mother had built. Had the field she'd loved most. The western section, their section, had shallow soil over hardpan. Had limited water access requiring expensive pumping. Had the fields my mother had always struggled with. The land she'd worked hardest to make productive, using every trick and technique she knew. They'd thought they were getting the whole farm. Instead, they'd gotten the difficult half. And I'd inherited the half worth fighting for. 3 days after the fence went up, my father appeared at the apartment I was renting. I was on the small porch, reviewing paperwork for my new farming operations. I heard his truck before I saw it. He parked but didn't get out immediately. Just sat there for several minutes. When he finally approached, he looked smaller somehow. Older. The arrogance and dismissiveness were gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. Uncertainty, maybe. Or regret. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was quiet. I nodded toward the other porch chair. He sat down heavily. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The evening was cooling down, that perfect California twilight temperature. "I broke everything," he finally said. "I was trying to prove a point. Trying to prove your mother was wrong about this land, about farming, about all of it." His hands were shaking slightly. I wanted to show that business thinking was smarter than her way, that my judgment was better than hers, that I'd been right to resent being here all those years. He looked at me then. I destroyed everything she built just to prove I was right. And I wasn't. I wasn't right about anything. It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. Maybe ever. Not an excuse. Not a justification. Just admission. I didn't respond immediately. Let his words sit in the air between us. Let him feel the weight of them. Finally, I said, "You gave away my inheritance to someone you barely knew. You let her dismantle everything Mom built. You chose her over your own daughter." He nodded slowly. I did. And I can't undo it. Can't fix it. No, I agreed. You can't. More silence. The sky was turning purple and orange, streaked with sunset colors. "The land I have now, your land, it's dying," he said. "Seraphine doesn't know what she's doing. The crops are failing. The soil is depleted. I don't know how to fix it." He wasn't asking for help. Not directly. But the implication was there. "Mom tried to teach you," I said. "For years. You refused to learn. You said it was beneath you. Said farming was for people who couldn't make it in the real world." He flinched at his own words being quoted back to him. I was wrong. About everything. "Being wrong doesn't undo the damage," I said. "Doesn't bring Mom back. Doesn't restore what you destroyed." "I know," he whispered. "I know." We sat in silence as the sun finished setting. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't expect me to help him save the land he'd devalued. Just sat there, facing the consequences of his choices. After my father left, I thought about my mother, about everything she'd taught me. She'd never spoken badly about my father, even when he'd hurt her, even when he'd resented her and the life she'd built. She'd just quietly continued her work. But she'd also quietly protected something. She'd kept documents, maintained registrations, preserved the water rights under her maiden name. She'd known, somehow, that one day I might need them. She'd planned for a future where the land would need defending. My mother had been playing a longer game than anyone realized. She'd loved my father despite his flaws. But she'd loved this land and its legacy more. And she'd made sure that if it came down to it, the land would be protected. I was just executing her plan, following the path she'd quietly prepared. The fence line wasn't my revenge. It was her provision. Her way of making sure her life's work wouldn't be destroyed after she was gone. That night, I visited her grave, a simple stone in the county cemetery, overlooking farmland. I brought flowers, wildflowers from the field that was now legally mine. "I found what you left me," I said out loud, though I was alone. "The documents, the water rights, the survey stakes. Thank you for protecting it. Thank you for thinking ahead when I was too young to understand." The next week, I filed incorporation papers for Morrison Farms, using my mother's family name, not my father's. I applied for agricultural grants, reached out to the farm workers Seraphine had fired, asked if they wanted their jobs back. Every single one said yes. I rehired everyone she dismissed. Miguel became my operations manager. Rosa, who'd worked in the fields for 15 years, became my crop rotation specialist. The team my mother had trained, the people who understood this land, came back. We started with soil testing. The land was damaged but not dead. With proper care, it would recover. My mother had always said soil has memory. Treat it right, and it remembers. Treat it wrong, and it remembers that too. We implemented my mother's rotation schedules, fixed the irrigation timing, started composting and mineral amendment programs. The land began responding within weeks. Not healed yet, but healing. Coming back to life under knowledgeable care. I bought a small house at the edge of my property, the Morrison property now, officially. From the porch, I could see the fence line. Could see both sections of what had been one farm. Mine was greening up. Theirs was still struggling. The contrast was becoming more obvious every week. Tom stopped by one afternoon. "Your dad's trying to sell," he said. "Seraphine wants out. But nobody's buying. The land has problems, and word's gotten around about how they've mismanaged it. I thought about buying them out. I could do it. With the agricultural grants and some bank loans, I could probably scrape together enough to make an offer. Reunite the property under Morrison ownership. But I didn't. Not yet. Let them struggle first. Let them understand fully what my mother had understood, that this land demands respect, demands knowledge, demands love even. You can't just own it. You have to earn the right to work it. 2 months after the fence went up, Seraphine left. Just packed her expensive clothes and drove away.
No announcement. No farewell.
Just gone, abandoning the property and the man she'd convinced to give up his daughter's inheritance. My father stayed. He had nowhere else to go. He was nearly 60, with a business degree he'd never really used and farming skills he'd refused to develop. He tried managing the western section alone and failed.
Crops died.
Equipment broke. Nothing worked. I watched from my property as he struggled. Some days I felt satisfaction. Other days I felt something more complicated. Pity, maybe, or just sadness at how badly he'd misjudged everything. Rosa mentioned she'd seen him at the feed store, looking confused about which fertilizer to buy. Miguel said he'd seen him trying to fix a tractor and making it worse. The man who'd dismissed farming as beneath him was learning how hard it actually was. One evening, 6 months after the fence went up, my father appeared at my new house. He didn't come to the porch this time. Just stood at the fence line, at the property boundary, looking at the contrast. My fields were green and productive. Crops were growing properly. The land looked cared for, healthy. His fields were patchy and struggling. Uneven irrigation. Pest problems. Everything wrong that could be wrong. I walked out to meet him at the fence. Didn't cross over to his side. Didn't invite him to mine. Just stood there with that wire barrier between us. I want to sell to you, he said finally. Whatever you think is fair. I can't do this. That land needs rehabilitation, I said. It's been mismanaged badly. It'll take years of work to restore it. He nodded. I know. I did that. I ruined it. Mom could have fixed it, I said. She would have known exactly how. But you wouldn't listen to her. I know, he repeated. His voice was hollow. I'll buy it, I said. But at the price it's actually worth now, not what it was worth before you destroyed it. The land's value has dropped because of your management. That's reality. He nodded. That's fair. We stood at that fence line for a while longer, the physical boundary between what I'd saved and what he'd lost. The sale took 2 months to finalize. My father moved into a small apartment in town. We weren't estranged exactly, but we weren't close either. The relationship had been broken too badly for easy repair. But something had shifted. He'd stopped defending his choices. Stopped blaming my mother or the land. He just accepted what he'd done and lived with it. That wasn't the same as redemption, but it was a kind of honesty at least. With the full property reunited under Morrison Farms, I began the real work. The western section needed extensive rehabilitation. Years of it. But I had my mother's journals. Had her knowledge. Had the team she'd trained. We started with soil amendment. Massive composting operations. Cover crops to restore nitrogen. Careful irrigation to rebuild the water table. It was exactly what my mother would have done. Rosa worked alongside me in those fields. Your mother would be proud, she said one day. We were knee-deep in dirt, testing soil pH levels. Not just of saving the land, of how you did it. With her documents. Her planning. She knew, I said. Somehow she knew I'd need those water rights someday.
Rosa nodded.
She was a smart woman. She loved her father, but she loved this land more. And she loved you most of all. That made me cry. Standing in a field of recovering soil, I finally cried for my mother. For what she'd built. For what she'd protected. For the legacy she'd made sure would survive. A year after the fence went up, both sections of the farm were producing again. The eastern section, my original inheritance,
was thriving.
The western section was improving slowly, but steadily. The land was healing.
My father helped sometimes.
Not with decisions, not with management, but with physical labor. He'd show up and ask if there was work. Simple work. Hauling, cleaning equipment, anything that didn't require expertise. I let him, not because I needed the help, but because he seemed to need to do it. Like physical labor was the only apology he knew how to offer. We didn't talk much during those days. Just worked side by side in silence. One afternoon, we were repairing fence posts, not the boundary fence, just regular field fencing. He stopped working and looked at me. I never said thank you, he said, for buying the land back, for not letting it be destroyed completely. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for Mom, for the land itself. I know, he said, but still, thank you. I nodded, didn't need to say more. Morrison Farms was becoming known in the region. People talked about the quality of our produce, about our sustainable practices, about how we'd brought back land that everyone thought was ruined, about the daughter who'd saved her mother's legacy. I started teaching farming workshops. Young people from agricultural programs would come to learn soil management, crop rotation, water conservation. I taught them everything my mother had taught me. During one workshop, a young woman asked, "How did you know the land could be saved when you saw how damaged it was?" I thought about that, about standing in dying fields, about reading my mother's journals, about finding those survey stakes. I didn't know for certain, I admitted. But my mother believed soil has memory. If you've treated it right before, it remembers. It wants to come back to life. You just have to give it the right conditions and be patient. The students took notes. Some of them reminded me of myself at their age. Eager, curious, respectful of the knowledge that came before them. I gave them copies of my mother's soil management techniques. Her wisdom deserved to spread. The farm became profitable, not just surviving but actually thriving. We sold to local restaurants, farmers markets, organic food distributors. The Morrison name was on every bag, every box. My mother's family legacy continued and protected. I kept her journals in my office. Sometimes I'd read passages, hear her voice in my head explaining why ash helps certain plants, why compost timing matters, why singing to seedlings isn't silly but serious, because attention and care are what farming really is. The day I finally took my father to the fence line I'd established, not the original one, but the property boundary that had saved everything, was 2 years after this all began. We stood there at sunset, the sky painted in oranges and purples. The fields on both sides were green and productive now. Both sections restored, both growing food, both alive. This fence divided the land, I said. But it also saved it. If I hadn't filed that petition, if Mom hadn't preserved those documents, all of this would be gone, covered in billboards and strip malls. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't make excuses, just nodded. I knelt down and touched the soil, the same gesture my mother used to make, feeling its texture, its moisture, its life. This land always knew who loved it back, I said. Mom understood that. I understand it now. Maybe someday you will too. I'm beginning to, he said quietly. Too late, but beginning to. We stood there a while longer. Not healed, some breaks don't fully heal, but honest with each other in a way we'd never managed before. The fence stood between us and behind us and around us. A symbol of division, yes, but also of protection. Of boundaries that had saved something precious. People in town started calling me Morrison more than Hale. My mother's family name became my identity. I legally changed it, Rowan Morrison. Felt right. Felt like coming home to who I was supposed to be. My father never remarried. Never tried another relationship. He lived simply in town, worked part-time at the feed store, helped at my farm when I needed extra hands. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. He came to the farm on my mother's birthday. Stood at her favorite spot, the high point overlooking the eastern fields. "I'm sorry I didn't value this when I should have," he said to the air, to her memory. "I'm sorry I didn't value you." I stood with him. "Tell her yourself," I said. "She can hear you better than I can." He nodded. stood there alone for a while. I walked back to the fields, to the work that never really stops. The fence remained. We maintained it, kept it strong. Not as punishment, but as reminder. A physical marker of the day everything changed. The day the land protected itself through documents and law and my mother's foresight. Sometimes I'd lean against those fence posts and remember that morning. The sound of hammers driving posts into earth. The look on my father's face. The feeling of watching justice happen quietly, officially, permanently. Today, Morrison Farms is everything my mother dreamed it could be.
Productive.
Sustainable. Respected. Teaching the next generation. Her legacy isn't just continuing, it's growing, spreading, inspiring others. I keep a photograph of her in the farm office. She's standing in the eastern field, the one I fought to keep. She's wearing work boots and a sun hat, hands covered in dirt, smiling at whoever took the picture. That was her happiness. Right there. Dirt and sun and growing things. I talk to her sometimes. Out in the fields, when I'm alone. Tell her about the harvest. About the new techniques we're trying. About the students learning her methods. About how the land is thriving. I like to think she knows. That somehow the soil carries those messages to her, wherever she is. My father helps with harvest now. Not managing, just working. He's learned some things finally. Not enough, not nearly enough. But some. He knows crop names now. Understands basic soil needs. Can operate equipment without breaking it. Small victories that came decades too late, but came nonetheless. We'll never have the relationship we might have had if he'd valued what my mother built. If he'd respected her wisdom instead of resenting her calling. But we have something. An honest acceptance of what was lost and what was saved. The fence still stands. Posts strong, wire tight. Marking the line where everything changed. Where the land defended itself. Where my mother's love reached forward through time and documents and water rights law. Some people ask if I'll ever remove it. I won't. That fence tells a story. My mother's story. My story. The story of land that refused to be destroyed, that waited patiently for someone who loved it to fight back. And every morning, when I walk those fields, I touch that soil and remember. This land always knew who loved it back. It knew my mother. It knows me now. And together, we're growing something that will outlast all the people who tried to tear it down. The farm is alive. The legacy is safe. And my name Morrison is on every harvest, every crop, every season. Mom would be proud. I'm sure of it. The land tells me so every single day.